Oh, this thing is quite big, but you know, we'll still take it apart. It is a Dimplex air purifier with slot-in filter. Let's take a look at the filter. No, let's plug it in first. So I shall stand it up. Actually, where's it? The air comes out here, right, at the top. Oh God, it's so big. It's not that big, but it's big for the bench. The air comes out here and is sucked in here. So I'll basically I'll just leave it this way. That's probably going to be the best bet. I shall plug it in. Whooshy noise. It's got two positions of the switch, low, high and off. Well, three positions then. Fairly quietish. Okay, rightio. Let's unplug it and take it to bits. So I get the feeling this was an eBay purchase. I get the feeling that the person selling it had discovered that when you need a new filter for it, it actually costs almost as much as the actual unit itself. That's what happens. So this filter, it looks very cheap and nasty. And it looks as though when it sits in, it's a curved filter. It looks as though when it sits in over that it doesn't necessarily perfectly seal right up to the edge. It looks as though there's other air channels in, but I guess most of this stuff will go through it. They also give strong warnings not to wash the filters, of course not, because they want you to buy more. Okay. This is unplugged. I feel I should mention that. 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. Let's grab a random screwdriver and stuff it down there. Are these anti-tamper screws? They better not be anti-tamper screws. They're kind of like, okay, they are anti-tamper screws. One moment, please. Job done. The anti-tamper screws were anti-tamper, but they weren't deep enough to stop me getting an ordinary bit into them. So let's turn this over since I can hear rattly things now. I will take this cover off. There's the fan. Oh, it does have the ioniser. Oh, look, that's the cheapest implementation I've seen in a long time. Here's the switch. Oh, there is a little green neon indicator by the look of it. I think it's green. I could plug it on again and see what colour it lights up. And a big switch. Let's put it to a mid position. I wonder if it turns on, if it even off. I shall plug it in. Don't do this yourself. I feel I have to say things like this, just in case some people do. It is not lighting. It's lit blue, actually. It's not a green one. Okay, it's a little blue indicator. There is this capacitor maybe for the motor. Because I can see 3 wires going to the motor. Or is that actually selected? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll whip it all out and we can reverse engineer it. I'll show you the circuit diagram of how this is wired. One moment, please. Okay, reverse engineering is complete. Let's explore. Very straightforward, as you'd expect. The switch has 8 contacts and it's got 2 bridging pieces that slide across those contacts. And the way they're arranged, and I can show you that afterwards. I can show you that right now, in fact. I'll show you it right now. Here are the 3 positions they have across those contacts. The live is bridged to these 3 pins here. And in the off position, the sliding contacts are bridging, they're actually bridging connections, but they're not actually used. So they're bridging over to these unused connections so the unit is off. When you switch it to the low setting, it bridges live over to the motor low, but it also bridges live over to the indicator and ioniser section of the circuit board. When you switch it to high, because of the range of the pins here, it still powers the indicator and ioniser section, but now it switches the power over to the motor high setting. So it's really just alternating between motor low and motor high, but powering this section all the time. Very straightforward, actually, quite nice. Simple, no electronics. Let's actually zoom down this a bit. So this is the section that powers things like the indicators and the ioniser. So in either of those positions, that switch will be on. And we have a 470 nanofarad capacitor purely for interference suppression purposes. The motor will not be making any noise electrically. So the only thing I can think that's for is the ioniser module, which is I wouldn't expect it to be that electrically noisy, although these things do tend to charge a capacitor up and then dump it. But it usually is a resistor in the input just to charge that capacitor up. So I wouldn't really think, I think that's quite a generous size capacitor for that. It has 2 1 mega ohm discharge resistors across it, probably because of its size, just to make sure when you unplug it from the wall, you can't get a tingle off the pins. We have a 220k resistor in series with this little blue indicator light here. which has a light guide on the switch that will just basically cast some light into this, and it will be conducted along to the output regardless of the position it's in. And then we have the ioniser module, which had the most intriguing way I've seen it. I don't like the fact that this is quite a high voltage between these wires and they've just basically twisted them together. I'd rather keep them separate and as short as possible. But I like the fact that they basically just hot melt glued them in and just splayed them apart. And this is a bipolar ioniser. This will be charged negatively about 3,000 to 4,000 volts, and this will be positive 3,000 to 4,000 volts. And the result is that you will get a slight corona discharge between them, and it will create active air components. This is where all the Karens that are saying, oh, ozone's poisonous, they probably don't know there's a unit right next to them producing trace levels of ozone. But to put things into perspective here, it's the equivalent. No, let me show you what it's equivalent of. One moment. Okay, let's put things into perspective about what they're claiming about the ozone here. They're claiming that the ozone is really harmful and toxic, just like this caffeine. You see, this is a bag of 100 grams of pure caffeine. Don't buy this. It's not a good idea. It's extremely toxic, pure caffeine. And the recommended daily dose of this is 200 milligrams a day. That's a fifth of a gram, which means this is 500 days. This is over a year's supply of caffeine. And if you just put a spoonful of this in your drink, you might actually die. It's quite toxic. So that would be toxic, right? This is the actual amount of ozone that is put out by these units. It puts out ambient outdoor natural levels equivalent to a coffee pod for your coffee maker. I hope that puts things into perspective for the Karens. It's not harmful. It actually recreates essential parts of outdoor air indoors, and that's why the air smells so fresh. Now that we're past that bit, that was a mini rant, by the way. It annoys me when people automatically say that these things put out toxic levels of ozone. They're so wrong. I don't know where that misinformation came from. Presumably gossip magazines and fashionistas. But anyway, let's get back to the subject in hand. When that's powered up, it powers up the interference suppressor capacitor, the neon indicator, well, it's not neon, it's the little blue indicator, and the little ioniser module that creates a very slight corona discharge and puts ions into the air and helps cleanse it, remove impurities, remove smells. But when you switch it on, as well as turning this section on, it selects either low or high. The motor is a shaded pole motor. This is the shaded pole motor. I'll explain that in a moment. And it's got a tapped winding. It's got 631 ohms, and then it's got an extra 143 ohms. The 631 ohms is the high setting, because the most current will flow and it will create the strongest rotation. And if you switch in the low setting, it adds a bit of resistance for a total of 774 ohms, and it runs slower. Okay, let's take a look at the motor. The fan mounts the motor with the usual sort of grippy bit here with a spring over it. Very hard to remove. I had to literally spirally remove this just to get this off. And then it came off easy enough. The motor is very simple. That's why they use these. It's extremely simple. A simple induction motor. Let's take a look at the construction of that and how they create rotation without any sort of capacitors and stuff like that. And the answer is very simple. These represent the windings, and there is the outer chassis, which is magnetically conducting of the fields, and then there are two poles on either side of the rotating core, which has a series of striped poles on it. If we take a look down here, you'll see there's a little extra gap. Can you see that little gap there? That is because down there, I don't know if I can light this by shining a light right down onto it. Can you see this slight hint of copper down there? No, you can't. There's the hint of copper. There is a little copper loop around one pole there and one pole there. And because of that shaded pole, as they call it, it causes because it's inducing current in that loop, it causes a phase shift, and that creates the rotating field that can actually spin that hub in the middle. So that is it. It's a very straightforward, let's brighten this up a bit. Let's brighten it up. There we go. It's a very straightforward unit, nothing too sophisticated. It wins lots of points for having one of these bipolar ionisers in it. Unexpected. This is the ones that Sharp sells as plasma cluster ionisers, but everybody else is using different names. And in the case of Dimplex, I don't even know if they mentioned it at all. Do they mention it? I don't know if they do. but it helps purify the air better. It does actually have an effect. It just basically changes the state of organic impurities. That just leaves the filter. It claimed a carbon layer in this. I'm guessing it's under this. Keep in mind that this has been in someone's house and it's full of their skanky, COVID-y type stuff probably. There it is. There's the carbon fibre. So we've got the outer layer, the first layer to take general dirt out. Then we've got the carbon fibre layer here. And then it's straight down after that into the pleated HEPA filter, which is just a fine filter. And contrary to them saying that you can't wash this, as far as I'm concerned, you can get a bit of extra use out of it by running it under the tap in the opposite. The air would normally come from this side. So by running it under the tap with a bit of soap and stuff like that, it will wash any impurities back out the filter from the side they came in, and you can get extra use out of it because generally speaking, people buy these, as probably happened in this case. They find the filters are really expensive and then they just put it on eBay or bin it. But there we go. In short, that was not too bad unit. It had all the requirements. It had the fan for blowing the air through at a couple of speeds. It had the replaceable filter, and it had the active air regenerator device and a little blue indicator. That's nice. But there we have it. The Dimplex mini HEPA air filter. Quite nice. Quite nicely put together.